sick of this. I'm out of here.
Where are you going?
For a drive.
When games offer you control over a single object, usually it's a walking character. And, you know, I find a perambulatory wander around as interesting as the next person. But there's often a real rush when you come across a machine, an entity of steel and fire, humanity's will for speed and adventure made manifest, a horse of iron. Driving in games can range from a fun and interesting way to break up on-foot gameplay that would otherwise be monotonous to a brilliant way to add a new dimension to combat or a fundamental RPG element. In some games, it's the whole point, and yet it can be quite hard to quantify exactly what makes a good driving experience. Why do I get such a thrill hopping in a tank? And why do some experiences feel tacked on or an afterthought? Why does skidding around in a warthog give me immense joy, but tipping an SRV for the 18th time that hour fills me with indescribable rage? I've no idea, but I'm sure over the next few minutes we'll offer our completely qualified and definitely entirely thought through opinions.
In 1974, just 2 years after Pong, the very first driving game, Grand Track 10, was released by Atari. An arcade cabinet, complete with a steering wheel, pedals, and a gear stick. It saw the player control a little white car around a circuit from a bird's eye view. 8 years later, Namco developed Pole Position, bringing a real racetrack, Fuji Speedway, into a game for the first time. With its cutting-edge graphics and real sense of speed, it was a huge hit, becoming the highest-grossing arcade game of 1982 in Japan and 1983 and 84 in North America. In 1986, Outrun was released by Sega, putting the player in control of a Ferrari Testarossa convertible on a road trip across Europe. Still to this day, one of the coolest settings for a driving game. It bumped up the standard in graphics and introduced a choice for the player in the route that they take to the end. The 1990s saw a rise in true 3D polygon graphics, with Namco's Ridge Racer series competing with Midway's Cruisin' USA, Sega's Daytona USA, and EA's first game in what would become the second highest selling racing game series, The Need for Speed. Second to what, I hear you ask? The series that has defined a subgenre, caused many an argument, and once lost me a £50 bet, Mario Kart. The first game in the series came out in 1992, but it was Mario Kart 64 that solidified its popularity by putting items in the forefront of the game's mechanics. This series has brought together countless players by focusing on fun interactions that let anyone pick up and play without even really needing to be into racing. At the end of 1997, sim racing became popularised with the release of Gran Turismo for the PlayStation. It took 5 years to complete, cost $5 million to develop, had 140 cars, 11 tracks, and introduced a career mode to the masses. It fast became the PlayStation's best-selling game, at a time when the PlayStation was the best-selling home console. In the early 2000s, driving games had their golden era. Burnout by Criterion Games put fun first, with over-the-top crashes. Need for Speed Underground showed off tuner culture with crazy car customization. Test Drive Unlimited brought a 1-to-1 scale open-world map of the Hawaiian island Oahu. In multiplayer, Gran Turismo 4 might be the best of the bunch, with over 700 cars, beautiful graphics, and an impossibly in-depth career mode. Once again, solidifying the PlayStation as the place to be for cutting-edge driving games. All of this not to mention Grand Theft Auto 3, or its more child-friendly cousin, The Simpsons Hit and Run. Games in which driving isn't the main point, but it's still most often the draw for players returning to them. What makes driving games so good? They provide something that most of us want to experience, but can't. Need for Speed takes you around the midnight streets in a souped-up hatchback. Absolute Drift gives you zen flow, chaining drifts down a mountain trail. Even in Euro Truck Simulator, you're put into one of the most important modern machines and set free across the open roads. These games are grounded in realism, and that allows the mastery of mechanics that a player experiences to be transferable to the real world. I'm still convinced my experience in these games greatly increased the speed at which I was able to pick up driving in real life. I've never had a lesson, never done a test, but I'm still bloody great. Of course, for some, the realism may be limited by the peripherals that you have access to. There are people that can spend £10,000 or more on a driving sim setup. Now for that, you can buy a nice second-hand car. But what can you do with that? What if you wanted to drive around the Nürburgring, through the Scottish Highlands, down the corkscrew of Laguna Seca? These are things that are out of reach for most folk, but not when you have access to games like Assetto Corsa, iRacing, etc. They give you a taste of some of the most exciting activities available to humankind. And sure, the real thing is best. A sim setup is second, but even with just a controller, it works. Hell, I enjoy Need for Speed the most with a keyboard. The sound of a roaring engine and the sight of a fast approaching corner are plenty enough to produce a thrilling racing experience, whatever the control scheme.
I don't play driving games. they don't pickle my chilies. My few recent experiences have been getting absolutely demolished by Toby across a range of driving games with different levels of realism, some of which I struggled to as much as move the car in the right direction. But, I do absolutely love driving in games. There's a freedom, a peaceful release that comes from getting away from the frenzied action of a game and just sitting back and going for a drive. I've never played Just Cause 2. I tried the opening mission and it just didn't grab me enough to keep going. But I have spent hours in the multiplayer mod, driving around and exploring the different scenery. It's a beautiful world with loads of places to enjoy a sunset drive. I haven't finished a single GTA game, but I have spent hours uncounted driving around in San Andreas and Liberty City. The only way I play these games is as follows. I find a car I like the look of, borrow it, leaving a note of course to say that I'll do my best to bring the car back in the same condition I found it. I open up the map and find something interesting that is ideally very far away, and then I drive there. Generally, I follow the rules of the road, stopping at traffic lights, honking at pedestrians, and only driving at a speed that feels appropriate to the road I'm on. I only occasionally get frustrated and fire warning shots into the air while absolutely slamming the pedal to the metal. I have actually finished Cyberpunk 2077, twice actually, but I still keep coming back to drive around its absolutely breathtaking open world in my dinky little Makigai Mai P126. For me, Night City is the perfect open world, with its Blade Runner vibes and weather that varies from absolutely beautiful to devastatingly bleak. At night, the neon lights and rain pouring down to splash in puddles on the wet concrete below just fills me with joy, and there's no place I'd rather go for a peaceful drive. It all comes back to the pleasure of movement in games. The best open world games dedicate so much care and attention to the fundamental action of just getting around, something that has been an important consideration as far back as Mario 64. If a game can make you smile just in the simple act of getting from point A to B, it's already won.
I keep getting the bad segments of these videos. It's either Josh and Toby think that I'm great at complaining, or that I'm really insightful. It's the inside, isn't it? Definitely the inside. So, driving in games. The real problem with driving in games is the simulation problem. You can't feel the accelerations, the raw thrill as you're pushed back into your chair. You can't... Well, what do you mean I can't talk about limitations? No, I don't talk about it every time. It's been like, the last 4, 5... Okay, fair. But it is a problem. I'm kidding. We all know that driving games, even at their highest fidelity, can't simulate some of the experiences of driving in real life. And that's okay, that's a limitation of gaming, but it's not one that really holds the genre back. Cars are really easy to make look beautiful in graphics engines. There's a reason Xbox usually uses the Forza game as the latest showcase of their graphics engine. High fidelity simulations are fun for a lot of people. A lot of us love driving in real life, and games can capture some of the thrill of that. F1 games do well for that reason, offering an experience that's out of reach for most of us, F1 driving, to anyone who wants it in an accessible and achievable manner. I think the real problem that besets driving in games is when it's an afterthought. It's a problem that plagues aircraft added in games even more, but this isn't that video. But cars, we know what they should feel like, even if you've never driven a real one. Look at Halo's driving. Land vehicles, they're nothing like real life. No gears, engines that respond at a drop of a hat, hover bikes, but it's fun, right? Things drift around, feel like they have weight. They feel kind of right. And generally, it's used quite well in the campaign. Vehicles are a strong enemy, a fresh problem to face, and then all the more thrilling when you get the chance to use them. Driving vehicles is just hard enough to provide some challenge, but not to put off or be annoying to the average gamer. The penultimate mission of Combat Evolved, driving through the crumbling interior of Pillar of Autumn, pulling off ridiculous jumps, skidding around corners. It's still the most fun I think I've actually had driving in games. And that includes Mario Kart. Compare this to Combat Evolved's contemporary, Mass Effect 1. The maker's driving physics have been widely panned, so it doesn't feel right, and whereas driving around blasting enemies makes sense in a sci-fi action shooter, in a RPG, story-driven game, does drifting around and crashing into things really make sense for gameplay? This culminates in the driving in Mass Effect 1 being a widely disliked part of an otherwise trend-setting game. This is what we as developers have to navigate. It can be really tempting to add a vehicle to a game, either to break up gunplay or change up the pace or make it more fun to get from one place to another. And we all know that disappointment when we find a vehicle just to discover its set dressing. We can't actually drive it. But I contend it's worse when you can drive it, but the driving's awful and it's very clearly just there to make the game feel a little bit more complete or or to give you something else to do. Sometimes games being limited are actually better. So there are times that we as developers need to resist that temptation to tag on driving elements, unless we can give it the time and effort to make it feel right. It takes a lot of testing to make it work well, and to ensure the learning curve isn't too steep for the kind of game you're trying to put driving into. And that temptation to make driving a very raw simulation, we've also got to resist that, because that's only going to be fun in certain types of games. You need to work out what fits with your game, and be honest that driving might not fit it at all. But for the love of all that's good in this world, please, please, don't put lackluster flying in instead.
This goes on for about another 10 minutes, so I'm just gonna cut that bit out.
Over the past couple of decades, sim racers have been refined, with modern titles like iRacing, R-Factor 2, and my personal favourite, Assetto Corsa, all striving to be the most realistic. Many real professional racing drivers have been using these games to relax and practice at home. Similarly, many real-life truck drivers have taken to Euro Truck Simulator and its sequel to let off some steam after a tough few days at work. This is the state of modern driving games. Realistic enough that there's not much further to progress, and easy enough to implement consistently across games that there's no motivation to innovate. Perhaps there isn't a need for innovation in the genre. There's nothing more that I want from Assetto Corsa or Need for Speed. Okay, maybe I do want Need for Speed World back, but what I really want is a kick-ass hardware setup with a wheel, pedals, VR headset, cockpit with motion. Maybe it's time to bring back the video game arcade.
Okay, by the script. No rambling this time, Matthew.
Stopping at traffic lights. Stopping at traffic light. Traffic light.
The Need for Speed. That's There's no wonder it sold the best. A little bit of improv for you. Snuck into first.
Next time it rains at night, go outside in the real world and look at some street lights in puddles in them. It helps, but you can find any light reflecting in puddles on concrete. It was the best thing you'll ever see.